to turn it around.
All right, it's 1 o'clock, so I figure we might as well start. So this is Nick Nelson. He is from the Kansas Department of Education. He's in charge of KPTP, and he's like the main licensure guy. Found out this morning if I ever had questions, I would contact you. Excellent. All right, so I'm going to let him take it away. Make sure you write down questions that you might want to ask and ask them, because this is your only chance to talk to the expert. After this, you get to talk to your instructors, and their answers are always going to be, what did the guidelines say, and have you looked at the examples? So this is your chance to ask questions.
Good afternoon. I made this for you. It's an apple tree, because metaphor. All right, so first and foremost, don't let the KPTP intimidate you. It's exactly what you're trained to do. So in a nutshell, all you're doing is designing a unit of study with lesson plans, assessment plans, demonstrating adaptations for different students in your classroom, and demonstrating reflective practice. That's all it is. And as we go through today, you'll see when you break it down task by task, there's 4 total tasks. And we'll go through like a brief overview of each of the 4 tasks today. It's very manageable when you break it down task by task. Okay. So as Kathy alluded to, the first step obviously is visiting our website, and I'll show you how to do that later too. Getting the content guidelines if you haven't already done so, and reading those through. There you'll find certain things you need to stick to, specific fonts, text size, that kind of thing. It's all there. So just make sure you adhere to that. The document itself has a 35-page limit. That does not include the appendices. So you'll be directed to put certain things like copies of assessments, copies of certain lesson plans in the appendix. That does not count toward the 35 pages. And a quick plug, because inevitably there seems to be candidates that get confused. An appendix is something that goes at the very end of a document. It's not something that's embedded throughout the document. So don't do that, because if you do that, obviously your 35 pages, you'll be way over that. And scorers stop scoring at page 35. So if you do something like embed your appendix, chances are they get to task 2 and have to stop. That's bad news bears. So you don't want to do that. Okay? End of the document. 10 possible scores. The rubrics are set out on a 1, 2, 3 scale. So max score is 30, cut score is 20. And you'll notice with the rubrics, the scale is 1 is criteria not met, 2 is criteria partially met, and 3 is criteria met. So there is no exemplary. So as long as you're sticking to the criteria, and the criteria met according to those rubrics, you'll be fine. And you'll notice it's not a deficit model. So they're not judging your writing ability, spelling, grammar, those kinds of things. Candidates often get anxious over, well, I get points taken off. It doesn't work that way. It's a holistic sort of model. Each portfolio is scored twice. Scorers are current practitioners, retired practitioners, and members of higher ed faculty. So that's your audience. They're familiar with the profession, so don't feel like you have to over-explain strategies or MTSS or the philosophy of teaching, etc. They're an audience that's familiar with the profession. Is everybody nice and terrified? All right. It's the watering can. So, the most important thing to do is to develop a timeline for completion. Don't try to do this overnight, your head will explode. So when we talk about developing a timeline for completion, as soon as you know your placement for student teaching, you can start on task 1. There are pieces you can start doing as soon as you know your placement. Once you're in touch with your cooperating teacher, you can start on task 2. That's sort of planning out what you'll be teaching when. So my biggest piece of advice I could give you is to not procrastinate when it comes to that. As soon as you know your placement, start on task 1. As soon as you're in touch with your cooperating teacher, start on task 2. That's how it becomes manageable. Collaboration is encouraged. They're going through the same experience at the same time. So your first resource really should be each other, and that's fine. Just don't cross the line into plagiarism, where you're lifting whole parts of somebody else's KPTP and putting it into your own. Obviously, very serious repercussions if we catch it. So again, it comes back to give yourself plenty of time so that you don't run short on time, panic, get desperate, and do something like plagiarize. That being said, you don't need a works cited page of any kind. Just name the resources you use, but you don't have to have an official works cited. Questions so far? We've been to the task overviews. Yep. All right. Yeah. Doesn't matter. Whatever melts your butter. Okay, task 1, contextual information and learning environment factors. So the KPTP, for the most part, it's a technical writing piece, so it'll read a lot like stereo instructions. If a prompt question can be answered with a list, answer it with a list. Scorers oftentimes appreciate that because they're trying to pick out evidence, and that's easier for them to do if they're not having to hunt through 3 paragraphs of narrative. So don't feel like the answer to every question has to be a narrative response with I think, I feel, I believe. Straight data, straight communication. The more specific and concise you can be, the better. So candidates a lot of times feel like, okay, I've got 35 pages. I need to fill up every inch of white space possible. It's entirely possible that a KPTP is 28, 30 pages. That'll be fine. So you'll start out by providing some contextual information for the community where your school exists. So information you might want to include would be, what does the poverty rate look like? The unemployment rate? Who are the main employers in the community? Information like that. The school district itself, what kind of testing do they use for math and reading? No Child Left Behind has finally kind of gone away. And so hopefully you've heard rumblings of the new state accreditation system, KISA, and school redesign. So asking your school district what they're doing in that new sort of age of accreditation where they can start focusing again on things like social and emotional growth, individual plans for students, and not so much on standardized testing. So it's quite the shift culturally right now. The school itself, information you might include, what's the available technology? What's that look like? The available resources? Is there something that sets that school apart from other schools in the district? So you might come across concerning statistics like 57% of all students in the school are below grade level reading. Something that you might want to include. Then you'll provide some contextual information for your whole class. And there's a table where you break it down, boys, girls, IEPs, English language learners. If you're single grade self-contained, if you're elementary, obviously you have one class. If you're middle level, secondary, or an all level, you might have your choice between 5 or 6 different classes. My advice is to choose your largest class, just because that gives you more opportunity for adaptation. Within your whole class, you'll choose a subgroup, and that should sort of come organically out of the contextual information that you gather. So for example, if you have a class of 20 students and 5 of them are English language learners, that should probably be your subgroup. You'll want to avoid, there's not a set number that has to be in a subgroup. The general rule of will be 3 or more for a group, but it also depends on how many students you have in the class. If you've got 7 students, right? And there are maybe 4 or 5 of them or all of them are below grade level in reading. They're all technically a subgroup. Okay, yeah.
Some other examples of ones.
So below grade level in reading, English language learners, behavior plans, IEPs, above grade level. Just the idea is you're choosing something that ultimately you adapt lesson plans or assessments. You're adapting somehow to those students' needs based on that criteria. So you want to avoid general criteria like boys or girls, because once it gets to the point where you're having to actually adapt material, it's hard to do on that basis. It really needs to be something more tangible, that you can do something like give the subgroup extra time on a quiz or whatever the case may be. You'll also choose 2 focus students. One should be identified as an English language learner or needing adaptations, so IEP, etc. If you literally have no students in your class that are ELL or special education, you can focus on an academic criteria like they're currently failing 1 or more subjects, something like that. It's fine. If you're kindergarten, 1st grade, they might be too young to be officially identified, but a lot of times your cooperating teacher's already using strategies for them. So that's fine too. They don't have to be officially identified if they're too young.
I would think if you're not choosing an ELL student or a student on an IEP, make sure you say that in your rationale. Why? Because it specifically tells you to. But the grader isn't going to know that you didn't have them in the classroom.
So make sure that, yeah. The second, yeah. Sure. That might not be your criteria for, like they might be, like English language learners might be your subgroup. And then if you're the focus student, yes, they're an English language learner, but you're also focusing on them because they're struggling in math or struggling in the subject, whatever it might be. The second focus student, it's sort of up to you. It doesn't have to be an academic criteria. If the student is struggling socially and you want to make it a social criteria, that's fine. The key thing to always keep in mind is that the expectation is you're going to build adaptations based on that criteria for those students. Okay. All identifying information should be omitted, so you don't name yourself, WSU, the district, the school, students, no names. Use abbreviations like FSA for Focus Student A, FSB, LO1 for Learning Objective 1, SG for subgroup. Save space, saves time. What you can do is provide a key to those abbreviations in the appendix. So if the scorer does come across something they're not familiar with, they can look at that. Because new acronyms are being born all the time. But it saves you from having to write out a multi-tiered system of support 20 times. Use your resources to track down information. So hopefully going into your experience, you'll have a couple weeks where you're observing your cooperating teacher. And during that time, kind of get a feel for your subgroup, focus students. And so for example, if during that time you find out that one of your focus students meets every week with the school counselor, don't be afraid to go have a conversation with that school counselor. They probably have some strategies that work well for that student. They can give you some insights. So don't be afraid to reach out to those people. The same thing with school psychologists, school social workers, library media specialists, special education teachers, paraprofessionals. Just explore your support system a little bit, kind of coming into the situation. Questions over task 1? I was like, what exactly do I ask? Yeah.
Would it for like school information, that like more on the website, or would that be more?
It depends on the data that you're going to gather. Most of it's going to probably be on the school website. And in that case, you're just communicating the straight data from that.
What kind of outline that find it.
Yeah, I mean, you can find things like the total student population, just general information like that.
The school secretary is a phenomenal resource for that. A lot of times they have a one-pager already ready to go because they know student teachers need that information. So that's something you could ask the school secretary. Yeah.
Task 2. So task 2 is all about designing your unit of study. Okay. So first things first, know your resources. It's been a long time since I was in the classroom, but when I was, there was one laptop cart, and you had to somehow get your name on it like a year ahead of time. And conflicts were settled via cage match, 2 teachers enter, 1 teacher leave type thing. So if you know you're going to have a project that's going to depend on something like that, make sure you get your name down. I'm not encouraging you to steal and hoard resources, but steal and hoard resources. Just make sure that when you get to the designing portion that you're going to have everything available to you when you get to the actual teaching part of it. So unit of study, grade level content, topic, rationale. So this will be something like 3rd grade, social studies, goods and services. The rationale could be a lot of different things. Be something like, well, in mathematics, they're studying currency, so this fits really well with what they're doing in mathematics. Make sure that your learning objectives are measurable and tied to state standards. So you can't create your own standards, right? Kansas state standards. Make sure that your assessment plan includes pre-assessments, formal, informal, formative assessments, and summative assessments. A misconception a lot of candidates have is that they have to have a pre-assessment and then give that exact same thing again as their summative. You don't have to do it that way. If you have 8 different learning objectives, you can have a pre-assessment for each learning objective. There's nothing wrong with that. It can be an exit slip, a piece of bell work, a survey. Just the idea is getting a quick, where are my students at with understanding this concept? So it can be 6 or 7 different things. And then your summative can be project-based. However you design it, the important thing is that they're measuring the same learning objectives. I'm sorry?
Assessment.
Huh?
Or language. It needs to be oral.
Oh, sure.
Like assessment just orally.
Mm-hmm.
Can we assess what they learn in grade? They learn from living with it. Can we assess what they learn from higher grade levels?
Sure. However you want to design it, see where they are. That's a good idea. Usually just make sure they're caught up on things they should have done previously. Yeah.
Summative.
For, oh, sure. I mean, again, it's how you design it, kind of your placement. So like for me, high school English was a final exam for the unit, was the summative assessment. That's just how it.
Assessment, you gave them test and final for the whole chapter, or what did you want to give them final? What was your assessment?
Well, it was a final assessment, like with short answer, multiple choice, essay questions over the last 3 novels and short stories that we've read. Yeah, however you want to design it. It doesn't have to be that way either. It can be project-based. You can do more than one summative. You can have like a formal kind of final exam and then a project-based summative.
Summative is like unit test.
So formatives are like the stuff along the way, like pop quiz or an exit slip, or even in the moment where like friends of mine that are elementary teachers have the windshield wipers, that's still a thing. Like students tell you how clear they are with the concept. If they're doing this, then they're like really confused.
Is formal and informal.
So a formal might be a pop quiz, that's more formal. Informal might be, hey, does everybody understand me? Thumbs up, thumbs down. That's more informal. Or an exit slip at the end of the lesson on their way out the door. just have a question. Oh, yeah, just formative just sort of means along the way, so in the middle somewhere.
We need to do both.
No, that's right.
We need to do both formal.
I'd recommend both of them, yes. It's not thou shalt, but if they're helpful, both formal and informal formats, I think are helpful. You want to have that check-in with students, you know, as you're going along. So that's what when we say informal, we just mean like kind of a check-in. Hey, is everybody on the same page? Everybody understand? Okay. So through in task 2, when you start to outline your lesson plans, VITRIC is an acronym that you'll run into. V is for video recorded. So you'll select 2 lessons to be video recorded. Those are the only 2 lessons that you provide a detailed lesson plan in its entirety in the appendix. All of your other lesson plans are just outlined in task 2. Those are the only 2, the video recorded ones, that you actually submit as part of the document. If they go in the appendix. I recommend those being sort of the culminating lessons where a scorer would see the most activity in your classroom. So maybe not choose the day where you might be losing 20 minutes to a video or proctoring a test, that kind of thing. Yeah.
So you said for 2 of your lessons, you need to video record, and then for those 2 lessons, you need to have like a detailed lesson plan back to the end. So how many lessons total?
It's not prescribed.
Okay.
It's sort of up
Just
to
make sure
you.
you add those 2. You need to add those don't need to be.
Correct. And it'll make sense if you look at the content guidelines when you go through task 2.
Okay.
You'll see basically the others you just outline. You outline all of them kind of in the template that is task 2. It's just on those 2 video recorded ones. Those are the ones you have to kind of treat. T is for technology. And make sure you're hitting both sides of that relationship. So instructor use to enhance instruction and student use to enhance learning. So make sure you both are engaging with technology. And this doesn't have to be every single lesson, you know, peppered, as it were. R is for reading strategies. Yes, Liz.
Can I just ask, for the technology, we have some students who say, you know, we don't have a lot of technology available. So what are some ideas besides just computer and smartboard that
Sure.
you've seen that are acceptable?
Because I mean, literally a whiteboard, like a small whiteboard, is technically technology.
Okay.
Anything like that. That's why it's kind of important in task 1 when you're discussing kind of contextual information. If you are at a school that is very limited with the available technology, that's why it's a good idea to mention it up front, so that when you do get to your lessons, if it doesn't have a lot of technology or it's very limited, the scorer understands why.
Right.
And of course, that'll happen.
Thank you.
Okay.
I think things that I've seen is teachers using their own cell phones to like take pictures that then
Oh,
kids
cool.
can manipulate.
Yeah.
Awesome.
R is for reading strategies. And remember that reading text is not a reading strategy. So this is where your KWL, close reading, think, pair, share, reader's theater, that kind of stuff comes into play. I is integration across content areas. That's all right. You got it? Okay. So if your unit is science, don't be afraid to implement math. Don't be afraid at all to implement art. That's just as important as any other content area. And lastly, C is community resource. That does not mean you have to have a guest speaker. Technically, anything on the internet is a community resource. So a website or an app, anything like that is a community resource. Yeah.
Will that include Google Classroom?
Sure. Yeah.
I've been on this like as you guys said, is there like somewhere that you go online that has all the information?
Yep, I will show you
Okay,
backgrounds. You don't like the apple tree? It's fine. I get
I
it.
do.
No, it's fine. I didn't work that hard on it anyway.
People are pitching things, the acronyms.
So V is video recorded, T is technology, R is reading strategies, I is integration across content areas, and C is community resources. It's all in the content guidelines. Don't be, yeah. It's all there. Any other questions? Okay, task 3. So this is actually teaching now the unit you designed, okay? So what this means when we talk about your timeline, going back to that timeline for completion, that means tasks 1 and 2 should be done, completely and totally done. If they're not done by the time you get to actually teaching the unit that you were supposed to have designed and been done designing, you're behind. Okay? It's not a recreation of task 2. So you've already told the scorers, these are the lessons I have planned, these are the assessments I have planned, this is how I'm adapting, what I'm adapting, and why. So task 3 is the one portion that's going to feel the most narrative, and it's the most open-ended. So it'll just have something like daily teaching reflection log, but it still sort of follows a formula. So the first thing you want to focus on are your assessment results. Discuss your assessment results. Even if it's an informal formative, where at one point you did like the thumbs up or thumbs down, half the class was thumbs up, the other half was thumbs down. Discuss those results and then what you did in that moment. Because half your class just told you, they don't understand, they're not following, right? So it could be something as simple as, I got the thumbs down group together, we discussed the concepts a little bit more quickly, got them back together with the whole class, and we moved on to the next thing. And then as we went on, I made sure to circle around to the thumbs down group and make sure that they were getting it. Yes, Liz.
Students are really worried that if they didn't meet their criteria or what they set out to do, or the students didn't understand that that means that they're going to fail. So what we try to tell them is that your reflection is more than important at this point. So if everything went crazy, you just explain it, and that's
it.
Great.
Yeah, if you'll notice in the rubric, there's absolutely nothing that allows a scorer to judge your practice. So there's nothing in there that says what you did had to go well. There's nothing in there about that. And I promise when I train scorers, I defend your honor. And I make sure that they're not doing that because they're not supposed to. Because you're student teachers.
Mm-hmm.
Even veteran teachers, right? A lesson can completely fall apart.
Mm-hmm.
When I was teaching, the lesson in first hour looked nothing like the lesson in sixth hour. It's just the nature of the profession, right? So task 3 is all about capturing between first hour and sixth hour the changes you make and why.
I think they needed to hear you say that and not just us, but
Sure.
That's what they're looking at, so thank you.
No, we actually watch the videos. We judge you harshly.
That was nervous laughter.
So assessment results, what you adjust based on assessment. So again, this could be something like, I gave an exit slip at the end of the day to see if they're kind of getting this concept. 20 exit slips, I can tell 15 of them, they're really not really getting it. So I'm going to start next day with bell work. We're going to revisit this. It's something as simple as that. Okay? Important note, if you are elementary, single grade self-contained, yes, it says daily teaching reflection log. It is not over your whole day. Don't do that to yourself. Your head will explode. It's the 50 minutes a day you're teaching math. Okay, KPTP is one content area. It's one unit of study, so it's a math unit. So it's that 50 minutes a day, not the whole day. Now, there's stuff that could happen, like with a focus student outside of the math lesson that you use to then adapt your math lesson. That's fine to discuss. That's okay. Okay. Don't forget to discuss your subgroup and your focus students. So whatever adaptations you built for them, or may have built for them in the lesson, were those successful or not? If not, what did you do to adjust it? Really trying to capture that reflective piece of, okay, I'm looking back at how everything went. This is what I'm going to change for tomorrow and why. And literally every teacher does that. Okay. So at the very end of task 3, you're going to disaggregate your assessment data. So there's a place in task 3 for these to go. It's 2 data tables. And you can kind of use whatever you'd like. Bar graphs or line graphs generally work the best. It can just be a simple data table. But what it is you have one table with your pre-assessment results and the other with your summative assessment results. So you have all your learning objectives and then disaggregated by your whole class, subgroup, focus student A, and focus student B. So that at a glance, both you and the scorer can see, here's how the students performed from the pre-assessment to the summative. You can see, wow, they really got this learning objective, or hey, seems like overall they struggled with this one.
Does that have to be like lesson objective for every lesson objective? There needs to be like a pre and summative. Here's how they test. They got 50%. And here for the pre-test, they got 50. Summative, they got 85. And that's for every student in the class, right?
Well,
Or they
it's-
just need to go by like, this is how they did on this lesson.
So like it kind of depends on how you design everything. But let's say your unit has 8 learning objectives. So learning objective 2, you had, the pre-assessment you had was an exit slip or a survey, just asking the student, do you understand this concept or what's your experience with this concept? So it doesn't have to necessarily be like a percentage, just measuring their understanding, kind of where they are. It depends on your content area too. And then the summative, again, it's sort of up to you. It might be one test, like a final exam, that's your summative assessment. But what you need to see and what a scorer needs to see ultimately is and hopefully this happens, right? The student gained understanding of the concept of whatever that learning objective is. Okay. And sometimes it doesn't happen. And we'll talk a little bit about that. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
Thank you. In the class that I chose, there's 2 students that I chose 4 students. One has IP, 504, and one that is very bright, and then the other one that is talkative.
Okay.
And that's in my group, my subgroup.
Okay.
Is it okay to choose? I chose just 4th one. He's bright. I have to repeat for him, not because he doesn't understand, but he's always busy talking to someone else.
Well, that might be a better focus student, just because for a subgroup, you don't really want 4 different criteria for a subgroup.
That's true.
Right, like you want 1 criteria for a subgroup. So it should be something like your subgroup of students should all have something in common, and that's your criteria. But then if you have one student in particular that's very talkative and it kind of gets them off task, that would be more of a good focus student.
Okay. Because the IP, they don't need the IP person, that person doesn't need any more time or more explanation or anything.
Okay, sure.
Then I can focus on that topic.
Sure.
In our objective, what would be the assessment? I mean, so you have 8 objectives, 2 would be assessment at the same time.
Well, it kind of depends on how you design it and how you look at it. So if it were me, I would probably have, if I had 8 learning objectives, I would probably have 6 or 7 different pre-assessments. Some formal, some informal. It just kind of depends on what my objectives are. And then just because I would have been like an 11th grade high school English teacher, my summative assessment is a formal, like, final exam. So it covers all the learning objectives top to bottom. So they're all formally assessed in that one final exam. So you can organize it that way if that's the way you want to do it, or you can do project-based summative, something that's not so much paper, pencil, short answer, multiple choice. It's more project-based, and that's fine too. What the scorers are going to look for are your rubrics for your assessments, how you're scoring performance for the students. Any other questions? Okay. Task 4. So the reason it's important to disaggregate your data at the end of task 3 is because at the beginning of task 4, you identify the 2 learning objectives that were most successful and the 2 that were least successful. And you do that obviously according to the data you disaggregate. And then you'll provide some reasoning, and that can vary. It can be something like, these 2 were most successful because this is when the students were using technology. So I think it really solidified the concepts for them. 2 least successful, this is when a foot of snow got dumped on the district. This is when I lost the most instruction time. You'll extend that a little bit to talk about some professional learning opportunities for yourself. So if you come out of the experience going, you know what, I need a lot more strategies for English language learners and special education students, I should probably get to a workshop or a course, something like that. And lastly, the communications log. It's in task 4, but it's something you sort of work on the whole time. You don't have to log every communication that you have. The idea of the exercise is looking back at the whole experience and identifying 5 or 6 different communications with different people that ultimately had a positive impact in your classroom. So for example, way back in task 1, when you chose your focus student, you found out that they meet every week with the school counselor. You went and had a conversation with that school counselor. They gave you some great strategies that worked really well. That's a great communication to put in communications. And so you try to record one for a parent, a student, faculty member. Just try to avoid general communications. Things like, I emailed a parent, it was fine. And something that was a little bit more impactful.
Does it have to be for everyone?
You include a total of, I think it's 6 communications. So it's just a total of 6 that you choose.
They have to be positive.
I hope they're positive. Yeah. I mean, you can definitely include one if it was really negative, but you learned something from it. That would be okay too.
So just to clarify, you want 4 learning objectives?
You might not have a total of 4. You might have 8 learning objectives. It's just identifying the 2 that were the most successful and the 2 that were least successful. Yeah. Sure.
Conference.
Yeah. If you have a parent-teacher conference and something positive comes out of that, then sure, that'd be a great communication link. Yeah.
So is it just like if a communication impacts like 1 or 2 students positively, or if it's like something that impacts your whole class positively?
It doesn't have to blow your socks off necessarily. You know, it can be positively impacts 1 student, that's fine.
Okay, so it can be like
You just want to avoid things like, because sometimes candidates, what they'll do is they'll literally put a communication like, I sent a notice home about our Valentine's Day party.
Right. Okay.
That's,
Okay.
yes, that's a communication, but that's not really something that's impactful.
I mean, impactful as far as we had an impact on them, or they had an impact on us?
Either way. If you learn something from it, you know, if you send an email home to parents and then the next day the student's behavior was better, that's a great communication. Okay, so once you're done and you're ready to turn your document into WSU for scoring, please make sure that you review the complete document before you turn it in. This happens more frequently than I'd like, but because this is something you work on over the course of many weeks, sometimes candidates have 4 or 5 different versions of the document saved. Make sure you don't turn in the one that only has task 1 done. Make sure that you turn in the one that's complete, because we don't look at them. And a lot of times your faculty here at WSU can't either, because there's 187 of you. So the only time I find out about it is when a scorer emails me back, go, hey, this one was easy. It's only a quarter of it here. And that becomes a huge problem for you, obviously. So be careful about that. Be careful about formatting issues. Make sure that, for example, there's not a blank page 34, because that probably means something got pushed to page 36, and that page 36 is not going to get scored. So just be careful with things like that. Okay, so.
You said a total of 6 communications?
I believe it is. I'm pretty sure it's a total of 6, yes. Okay, so here's our website, and I'm sorry about it, but if you go just to ksde.org, in the search bar, just type in KPTP, and it's the first link that comes up for you. So that's where you can find the content guidelines, the KPTP overview. It's not an apple tree, but same information that I just gave you. And then the template. Okay, so yes, you have to use this template to create the document. We did have a candidate last semester that turned in something they created themselves, and we couldn't take it. It has to be standardized. This is kind of what it looks like. It's pretty straightforward. And then there are some sample portfolios at the bottom if you want to look and see how some other candidates answered a question.
Just on that, if they had 5 lessons,
We don't prescribe, because it really just depends on the situation. Because a unit of study, it really depends on how you design it. It could be a week, it could be 2 weeks. Are you on a block schedule? So is that 2 lessons in a day? Is it 1? Is it a mini lesson and something else? It just really depends on how you design it. So we don't prescribe, it has to be this many lessons. Yeah. That's your placement, whatever you're doing. Like if your school has a block schedule, you're probably doing 2 lessons in a day. It'll be task 1 is probably where you put that information.
So to clarify, if I teach math for 30 minutes or I teach math for 50 minutes, it just depends what my school is, correct? You're not saying a lesson has to be X amount of minutes.
Because it really depends on, because if right now, unfortunately, if you're a PE teacher, you might see your class once a week for 25 minutes in some places. So your unit of study is going to look very different from an elementary math unit.
Are you able to change those charts on there?
The margins, yeah, you can kind of adjust the tables themselves. Yeah.
Just like the objectives one, I believe it had like 5 spots. Can you add another one? Okay.
Yeah.
So your unit of study or whatever, is it for like one specific hour? So like if you're on block schedule, you have 7 hours.
Yeah. You choose one class.
Just one class. You don't have the same class 8 hours.
Right. One class of students. And in that case, like I said, I recommend choosing your largest class just because it gives you more opportunities for adaptation. Okay. So my contact information is there. You shouldn't need to contact me. If you're having trouble completing the document or with your placement or with your cooperating teacher, that's information that needs to go to your faculty. I won't be able to help you with that. And then once they are submitted for scoring, I promise you don't need to call me. It's being done as quickly as possible. With an institution this size, it could take about 4 weeks to get your scores back. But I promise I don't sit on my hands to make you sweat. I get them sent out and scored as quickly as possible. Okay. So the other 4/3 of what I do, and that's a math joke, is I work with educator licensing.
Before you go to licensing, can you talk a little bit about in the Appendix C where they have to have the administrator fill out the, it's like 27, oh, yes. Does that actual form go in there, or is it only the reflection of their form?
It's just there to help you when you're filling out the portion where it asks you about reflecting specifically over the observed lessons or the video recorded lessons. That's something that you keep just to help you reference back to, you know, my administrator noticed this, so I did that.
Thank you.
You can turn it well before the deadline.
Yeah, I mean, it's ultimately up to WSU. They'll give you, obviously, a deadline. I believe Tierney Mount is who you probably will turn them into. Okay, so at this point in your program, you're probably eligible for an emergency substitute license. It might be something you want to consider. The cost is fairly substantial. It's $60 for the application and a separate $50 for the fingerprint background check process. If you were to apply now, for your very first emergency sub license, it would only be valid through June 30th, but you could apply for a renewal immediately, and the renewal will be valid for 2 school years. The reason I recommend it is just because you never know. When I did my spring placement for student teaching, my cooperating teacher was leaving on maternity leave. So the principal came in and said, would you like to stay the last 3 weeks and finish out the year? And I was like, you're going to pay me actual money? Like, I could put chicken and ramen and stuff. So, but the thing was I had the license in hand, so it wasn't a problem. If you come across that situation, it's never the case where you can simply call our office and boom, you're going to have a license the next day. Our processing time, no matter what you want us to do, is 4 to 6 weeks. So you have to anticipate that your entire career. Okay? You have to anticipate that. So, and our system literally won't let us issue a license without a background clearance. It's impossible. So that's for good reason. Right? So it's just something to consider. Now, once you're done with your program, and you're applying for your standard initial teaching license, so long as you complete that application process, which ends with you paying for it, if you do that before June 30th, before your e-sub expires, you don't have to do the fingerprinting. But as soon as a license expires, the fingerprinting is required. Once you have your initial license, please do me a couple favors. Print it out, put it in a frame, hang it somewhere in your classroom, and please read it. Everything you need to know about upgrading it, renewing it, when it expires, all that information is printed on the license. Do not listen to your district tell you what's required. Do not listen to your principal or your neighborhood teacher. Okay? It is the lamest superpower in the world, but I am one of 6 people in the world that really understands how educator licensing in the state of Kansas works. So when you have questions specifically about your license, make sure that you're contacting us. Okay? So the way that it's divvied up in our office, it's by the first digit of the last 4 of your social. So if the last 4 of your social begins with a 4, 5, 6, or 7, then I'm your consultant. The easiest thing to do is to email us for a couple reasons. As you can imagine, if you can imagine the number of phone calls we get in a day, and there's 6 of us. So there's that. So it can be difficult to get us on the phone. But that way also with an email, you have written record of who you talked to, when, and what you were told. So in the event that there's some disagreement with your district saying, oh no, it's this, you can say, well, Nick gave me this and he's a superhero. He's one of 6 people in the world. Did you know that? You're not one of those 6 people. And then that be. It's just one of those things, like especially with new teachers, so many issues crop up with their licenses And a lot of times they get bad advice from their district, and their district doesn't mean to, obviously, they don't have bad intentions. It's just there's a lot of misconceptions out there. And the reason everything's printed on your license is to hopefully mitigate those misconceptions, but then knowing that we exist at the State Department. So in the event that you actually do have questions about your license, then we're the people you want to come to. Okay, a couple more plugs and I'll leave you alone forever. So if you're interested in added endorsements, so for example, if you're completing an elementary program and you want to add middle level mathematics as well, endorsements like that just require the extra praxis content test. It can help your marketability a little bit. So keep that in mind. If you have long-term career goals, like someday you'd like to be a principal or superintendent, a school counselor, something like that, just know that those licenses are tied to specific graduate level programs at a place like WSU. So a lot of times candidates, when they first get out of their program, they go get a master's in curriculum instruction right away. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. It's just 5 or 6 years down the road, they say, you know what, I'd like to be a building principal. Do I really have to go get a whole nother master's degree? Pretty much, because that master's in curriculum instruction has very little to do with preparing you to be a building principal. So just advice, just if you have goals like that, to kind of plan ahead and kind of map it out so everything lines up. Any questions about licensing? Yeah.
You get multiple endorsements for one license.
Yes. One license, multiple endorsements. You don't have to renew endorsements separately. Yeah.
So what if someone already works in this public era?
Yeah, it has to be done specifically through our office for a license. Not every background check is created equal. They look for different things. So like one they might conduct for employment is not the same one that we conduct for licensing. We do a much more thorough background check for licensing. And you get enrolled in this neat program called RATPAC, which if you ever get arrested, we get notified. Which, when you think about it, is a good thing, right? Because it's up to us to make sure, did that crime involve a child? Okay, we need to talk about that. So that's why when people are like, well, I got my concealed carry, can't you just use that? No, it doesn't work that way. A lot of people think I put my fingerprints into the thing and it goes into a system and everybody has access to that, and it just doesn't work that way. So that's why. Yeah. So what you need, there's this fingerprint card order form right here. And you just fill it out. We'll mail you one from our office. It's a paper pre-formatted card. The code of card is FD, is in Federal Document 258. It's a very common card. So a lot of times police stations and sheriff's offices will already have that code of card on hand. And there's actually somebody at USD 259 that I think is trained to take fingerprinting. So I know they have them too. So you don't have to always wait on us to mail you the card. But you need that card. You take it to police station, sheriff's office. Your campus police might even do it. Just kind of depends. They fingerprint you on the card, and then it's mailed back to our office with a $50 fee. But they're separate processes, so if you want to submit your online application ahead of time, like ahead of the fingerprinting, that's fine. It doesn't hurt anything.
What if a student gets married or is getting married? How does that whole thing, what do you want? Just
super simple. You don't have to send in a marriage certificate or anything. There's a form. So here's all of our forms. At the very bottom, name or change of address. You just print that out and send that in. But that reminds me, thank you. Another piece of advice. Even if you honestly believe, after you're done with your program, I'm never teaching, apply for your license. I don't want to spend the $100. Apply for your license. Because I'm not kidding. Last week, I had a guy contact me. He completed his program at Southwestern College in 1986. Never applied for his license. Now wants to teach. He's got to repeat a program. Because he never applied. It is always, 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 always easier to renew an expired license than to start from scratch. Okay? Yeah, you'll hear horror stories that, oh, I let my license expire. I've got to go like retest and do all this stuff. It's not true. You know how you know it's not true? It'll be printed on your license. Hi, come on in. It's good stuff. Everything you need to know about it is printed on that license. So even if you're like, you know, I'm getting married, I'm moving to another state, never going to see Kansas again, I promise you, never say it, because I hear the story every day. Never thought we'd come back. Here we are. And then I got to deliver really bad news. So.
I'm sorry, I'm asking you so many questions. One of my students is graduating in May, but they will be moving to Texas over the summer. Should we still say get your Kansas license and then contact the Texas Department of Ed and they'll tell you all that you need to do?
Yep. So every state is different. A lot of times people think that it's a simple transfer or there's reciprocity. It doesn't really work that way. 50 different states issue licenses 50 different ways, if you can imagine that. But most states do require like a valid out-of-state license. So if you have your Kansas license going to Texas, I think generally that's an easier process versus not having it, is my understanding. But there are just so many different, like in Arizona, you have to pass a test on the U.S. Constitution and Arizona state history before you can get a standard license. In Washington, you have to be a resident of the state for 5 years before you can get their standard license. So it's just really weird rules. But always go to their state, like their websites. They're going to have an out-of-state application just like we do, and instructions will be there. And typically, they're pretty straightforward.
Once you apply for the license, and you have to finish all your praxis tests.
So
you have all that done.
Yep. So thank you. That's another piece of advice. I took my praxis exams a semester before I graduated. I really recommend doing something like that. I get candidates very often panicking, calling me in June. I didn't take my test yet. I've got a job offer. What do? I'm like, travel back in time to December and take your tests. You know, we have temporary licenses available kind of in an emergency type situation like that, but it's so much easier if you just don't get yourself in that situation at the beginning. Take your tests ahead of time, get that done, so that when you do apply for your license, everything's pretty seamless. Generally, WSU asks for your KPTPs early April. So then you'll have scores back May-ish. So, and then you also have to remember 187 applications then go to Tierney. And so that takes her some time to verify your tests. Your degree has to be issued, all that kind of stuff. And then she'll submit the applications to KSDE, at which time you'll receive an email requesting the application fee. You log back in, make that payment, and that's the receipt date of that application. One thing with that, if your WSU email address is about to get shut down, don't give that one to us. We have to be able to reach you. So make sure that you're using your Gmail or something else like that, because if there is an issue at some point in time with the application, and there can be, sometimes your fingerprints get rejected, they're too light or whatever, that's how we communicate with you. So make sure that we can reach you that way. Yeah.
You said that usually they ask for the KPTP in April if you're graduating in the fall.
No, in spring,
No,
sorry.
that's what I mean, like what would our deadline?
October.
If you are, yeah, it's usually around Halloween.
Okay.
Ha!
Yeah.
Yeah.
So with kind of going off that, like, if we got ready in December, will it take longer for us to like get our stuff like the boots and stuff like all the basics?
Generally not, I don't think so, because I think, I'm trying to remember, and it depends on the university, but I think Tierney sticks around and make sure that those get submitted. I don't think it's ever really been a problem. And hopefully, like if you're applying for jobs, especially at semester, just my experience, mostly what you run into districts really needing, like somebody's walked out on them at semester. So they're fine. If you're like, hey, it's all in process, it's all going, as long as they know it's in process, then it's fine.
Okay.
And we
that's
have,
what I'm like, but if you were to get a job in January, they start second or third day of January sometimes.
Tierney doesn't get a break like we do, so she only gets that Christmas week. So they get to work
And probably not. You're gonna need that e-sub license that he was talking about.
I mean, it really depends, because ultimately it's something we don't have control over. Like when it comes to a district hiring you and the terms of their employment, like there are some that are like, no, thou shalt have the license in hand, and we can't do anything about that. And we feel bad, I promise, when people call and they're like, but I got a job, do it faster. And I'm like, but I'm on the phone with you.
I just wanted to share that my daughter, she's in the second grade, and she just got a new teacher that that just graduated in December, and she started in January. So it must, or like you said, it must just depend on the school or the district, or they just process her in time.
What we like to tell you and hope that the district accepts is whatever day you make that payment for your license. So it starts with you, and Tierney will go through this with you, I'm sure. When you apply, goes to Tierney sends it to us. You get an email requesting a payment. Whatever date you make that payment is the effective date of the license ultimately. So let's say that's December 20th. When your license is issued, that's going to be the effective date, even though it's not issued until January 20th. Most districts are fine if they have that information to have you start.
Did you say, I couldn't miss it, when should we apply for our licenses?
Your initial one?
Yeah, like,
Tierney will tell you.
Okay.
They'll walk you through that process. In general, I'm going to guess it's going to be early May, mid-May, something like that.
If you're a spring graduate.
If you're a spring graduate. If you're fall, probably early November before Thanksgiving, or something like that.
In fact, if you are student teaching right now, tomorrow is the meeting with Tierney.
That's what's good.
Right.
I know that's what's supposed to be. I thought we were gonna need some.
Sorry, I'm going all the way back from when you
That's
said
fine. That's what I'm here for.
the man graduated in 1960 something. I'm not gonna do this. I'm gonna apply right away.
Thank
But
you.
how long does that? Like, if you do wait, when do you have to retake the program? Like, what is the?
It really depends on the institution. It's not a state requirement. But when you think about how much a teacher prep program has changed, and whatever that is, almost 40 years, like you can't just send somebody into a classroom. You know what I mean?
Right.
That's kind of, I think, how institutions generally judge it. Now, the state has a requirement that's called recency, and what we look for is 8 semester credit hours within the last 6 years, which all of you need if you apply right away, because that was your student teaching internship, so you have no problem. But if you wait and don't apply for 6 years and then come back, at the very least, you have to do 8 more credit hours.
Okay.
So then, like I said, it's always easier, get it, and then if you have to let it expire, that's fine, and then revisit it in the future. Yeah.
This is like a future question, like after you get your license.
Sure,
How often do you have to do that? I know you had like all the information on it, but
that's fine.
we don't know.
That's
And you have to pay $100 each time, like.
Sure.
Cost review each time?
Yeah, so currently, your standard initial license will be valid for 2 calendar years. And so we hope, in a perfect world, you get hired right away in a position that you're actually licensed to teach. So for example, your elementary license, you get that 3rd grade classroom. If you get hired in a special education position, that's another story. So we're talking about perfect world. You get a 2-year mentoring program, and that's how you upgrade from the standard initial 2-year license to the 5-year license. An application fee is always required. So yes, you have to pay us each time. I know, have to have money. And then, but as long as you don't let your license expire, you don't have to do the fingerprinting again. So that's really important. And when it comes to renewing and upgrading, you can upgrade as soon as you're eligible. You don't have to wait. Renewing a license, you can do it up to 6 months in advance of the expiration. So in the future, when you're on that 5-year professional license, use that 6 months. So many people run up against it. It becomes a nightmare. Okay. And thank you. Plug really quick, because this has become epidemic all of a sudden. Once you get your 5-year professional license, currently the system, you probably already know about it's the professional development point kind of system. That's how you renew a 5-year professional license. If you have a bachelor's degree on your 5-year professional license, college credit hours are part of that requirement. You have to earn a certain amount of professional development points, but some of those points include actual college credit hours. So what's happening here lately is I'm getting a lot of calls from people that it was their first professional license, so it's been 5 years, and they're just now realizing with a month to go that they needed some college credit hours and don't have it. So that's really a bummer. But then in my mind, I'm going like, why didn't you read your license? It's printed on it. Yeah.
So when you get that, you have to go back to school?
Not to school. It's like continuing it. So,
Like, how would you get the?
well, part of it is in service. So like you'll go to workshops and in services with your school. It really just depends. Like for example, the Olathe School District, they do a conference every summer, but they have Mid-American Nazarene set it up to where you can attend that conference for 2 college credit hours. It's all through your district. So when you are hired, most of them have software like My Learning Plan or PDP Toolbox, and you enter in your activities, and it goes to their professional development council. They look at them, approve them, and award them. I don't know how it works. Shop around, because I know when the idea of, but I just got out of college, now I have to go back. It's like, well, yeah, but not really. 4 credit hours isn't that much. Courses at a community college are fine. So if you find just a tech course at a community college, those work. At Baker University, I think they have, if you're a teacher going in for continuing ed, it's only $50 a credit hour. And WSU has continuing ed too, that they do workshops. So shop around. Like there's a way to do it cheaply. You don't have to do like a graduate program to renew it.
I'll speak to Wichita State as school education. Baker is very cheap, and you've got some courses right now that we call market-based, which kind of compete with Baker for cost wise. So there's a lot of options out there. We're not looking to now. So there'll be a lot of options at your school. Just I say it's trying to grow our offerings for that. They call it non-degree. So it's not like you're going towards a master's.
So in general, it's not like you have to apply all over again. It's pretty straightforward. So, yeah.
And this is every 5, whenever we renew it every 5 years, we eligible credit hours somewhere.
Everything, well, current.
Okay.
I can't speak to what might, but again, always read your license. It'll be printed on. Now,
Okay.
if you do get a master's degree in the future, you don't have to, college credit isn't part of the renewal requirement.
Okay.
It's just the straight points. Or you can renew twice based on experience. That's the current system. But I'm trying to put out as many warnings as I can now while you're young, so that you don't get to.
Yeah, I didn't know that, so.
Yeah. Sure.
So is there like, how much do you have to have within those?
It's 160 total professional development points. But when you think about it, it's over a 5-year span. A point generally is a clock hour of in-service. And if you just think about, and you'll find this out, think about when you come in for the summer before you actually start teaching in the fall, generally, they usually have, 3-4 days of just professional development for you. And if you're a new teacher, there'll be lots of opportunities. So it's one of those things like they don't leave you out in the cold. They make sure that you have access to these things so that you can maintain your license.
Those first 2 years, do you have to have those hours as well?
No, currently it's just a 2-year mentoring program. Now, your school district may still have you keep track of it because it also comes into play with salary movement. But for licensing, licensing is just the mentoring. And make sure that's happening to you. If you get to a school and you read your license and it says to upgrade, completion of a year-long or 2-year-long mentoring program, and you don't know that that's happening to you, make sure that that's happening to you. Yeah.
License and you want to add something to it that says ELL.
It depends on the endorsement. So something like ESOL currently, you just have to take the extra praxis exam. But that's changing here soon, just because we found that it's a lot more beneficial, especially for students, if the teacher completes at least a few courses in ELL before taking the test, so that they actually have strategies. But content endorsements like middle level math, English, science, that's testing, secondary math or English testing, something like special education or elementary or gifted, those require program and tests.
What does an endorsement like secondary math, what does that allow me to do?
It's mathematics 6 to 12 currently.
So I can teach
Maths.
those? Okay.
Yep. Now, can you pass the test? That's the question. All the way up to Cal. If you can, awesome. I would not be able to. Yeah, there is the middle level endorsement that's just for grades 5 through 8. So, and it just really depends on, you know, like I said, I think it's a good idea to increase marketability, especially at the beginning, if you're okay with teaching middle school students. There are some people like, no, I wouldn't be caught dead. It just depends on your, yeah. Yeah.
Appreciate that.
The college credit portion. No, it could be an MBA. Sure. Yeah. And that's actually not a license through our agency, just so you know. Yeah, it's through disability and aging. Is who does those. But yeah. Okay.
Thank you very
Thank you
much.
all very much.
Thank you.